Now, if you're a fan of the strange, the dark, and the mysterious, you know that some of the most terrifying stories aren't the ones found in horror novels. They're the ones whispered by people who were there. People who saw something they weren't supposed to see. Tonight, we're going back to 1976, to a night that changed China forever. But we're not just talking about a natural disaster. We're talking about what came after the earth stopped shaking. July 28, 1976, the city of Tangshan. At 3:42 in the morning, while a million people were fast asleep, the earth beneath them didn't just tremble, it ripped itself apart. It was in 7.8 magnitude earthquake. In just 23 seconds, a massive industrial city was reduced to a graveyard of brick and dust. The official death toll sits at over 240,000 people. Some say it was much higher. Now imagine the chaos. The power grid is gone. The roads are shattered. Communication is non-existent. The central government in Beijing immediately mobilizes the military. Enter our witness, a man we'll call Old Wang. In 1976, Wang was a young, hardened officer in a military transport regiment. He wasn't a man given to flights of fancy. He was a soldier of the era, stoic, practical, and a firm believer in science and materialism. If you told him a ghost story back then, he'd probably have laughed in your face. But by midnight on July 28th, Old Wang wasn't laughing. He was leading a convoy of heavy Jiefeng trucks, those iconic olive-drab Chinese military vehicles, racing through a torrential rainstorm toward the heart of the disaster. The rain was so thick you could barely see the taillights of the truck in front of you. The road was a mess of mud and debris. They were about an hour outside of Tangshan, navigating a particularly lonely, wooded stretch of the highway near the Fonan district. Suddenly, Old Wang, who was in the lead vehicle, felt his truck shudder. Now, these trucks were built like tanks. They were simple, rugged, and hard to kill. But the engine didn't just sputter. It felt like the life was sucked right out of it. The truck rolled to a dead stop. Wang cursed, thinking it was a fuel line issue. But then he looked at his dashboard. Every light was out. He tried the headlights. Nothing. He reached for his radio. Dead air. He climbed out of the cab into the pouring rain to wave the rest of the convoy past. But he stopped dead in his tracks. Behind him, one by one, the headlights of the entire convoy were vanishing. Dozens of trucks, all stalling at the exact same moment. Think about that for a second. In the middle of a rescue mission, in a national emergency, an entire military fleet just dies. The soldiers climbed out of their cabs, confused and frustrated. But as they stood there in the mud, a heavy, oppressive silence settled over the road. The rain was still falling, but the sound of the rain seemed muffled, like they were standing inside a vacuum. Old Wang felt the hair on his arms stand up. It wasn't just cold. It was a bone-chilling, unnatural drop in temperature. And then, through the thick fog and rain, they heard it. Klip glop, klip glop. It was the sound of hooves, but not the heavy, meaty sound of a horse hitting pavement. It was a hollow, rhythmic clicking, and with it came the sound of creaking wood. Like an old carriage that hadn't been greased in a century. Old Wang shouted for his men to get back inside the trucks. He didn't know why he said it, but every instinct in his combat-trained brain was screaming, "Hide." From the direction of Tangshan, the direction of the dead, a shape began to form in the fog. It was a horse, but Old Wang would later describe it as more of a shimmer of a horse. It was skeletal, its coat a pale, translucent gray. It was pulling a wooden carriage, the kind you'd see in a museum from the Qing dynasty or even earlier. And then came another, and another. As the first carriage passed Old Wang's truck, he saw a lantern hanging from the side. But the light inside wasn't a burning wick. It was a ball of cold, emerald green fire. This is what we call linhua, ghost fire. But it was the cargo that nearly broke him. The carriages weren't empty. They were piled high with parts, limbs, torsos, and heads. Thousands of them. And as they rolled past, Wang realized that the faces on those heads were blinking. They were looking around with wide, confused eyes. These weren't just physical remains. These were the souls of the 250,000 people who had died just hours before. They were being moved. Now, for those of you listening who aren't familiar with Chinese metaphysics, or Xuanxue, what old Wang was witnessing is a phenomenon known as Yin Bing Jie Dao, the ghost soldiers borrowing the way. In ancient Chinese belief, the world is governed by a delicate balance of Yin, the energy of the dead, and Yang, the energy of the living. Usually, these two worlds are separated by a massive, invisible barrier. But a catastrophe like the Tangshan Earthquake is like a nuclear bomb to the spiritual world. The sheer volume of sudden, violent death creates a Yin surge so powerful it rips the fabric of reality. When this happens, the underworld, the Yu Ming, has to send in the professionals, the soldiers from hell. These are ancient entities whose job is to harvest the spirits before they become vengeful ghosts or get lost in the human world. They borrow the roads of the living because in that moment of chaos, our roads and their roads become one and the same. Old Wang and his men were literal witnesses to a mass funeral procession being conducted by the universe itself. The procession went on for a long time. Some soldiers claimed it felt like hours. Others said it was only minutes. Time doesn't work the same way when the ghost soldiers are near. Old Wang sat in his cab, eyes pressed shut, praying for the first time in his life. He felt the truck rock slightly as the wind from the passing carriages hit the metal. It was a wind that smelled of old earth and stagnant water. And then, just as suddenly as the silence had started, the sound of the rain returned. One of the soldiers in the back of the convoy accidentally leaned on his horn, and the loud honk shattered the tension. Wang looked out the window. The fog was clearing. The green lights were gone. The road was empty. He reached for the ignition. He didn't even have to turn it all the way. The engine roared to life with a ferocity that startled him. All the trucks, every single one of them, started back up instantly. When they finally reached the ruins of Tangshan, the horror they found was grounded in reality. But for old Wang, it was a mirror of what he'd seen on the road. For years, this story was suppressed. The government didn't want superstitious tales distracting from the tragedy or the recovery efforts. But you can't silence dozens of soldiers. The story leaked out. It became a legend shared in military barracks and dark corners of the early internet. Scientists will tell you it was a hallucination caused by tectonic stress or infrasound-induced paranoia. And maybe they're right. But old Wang, until the day he died, never looked at a dark road the same way again. He always said the most terrifying part wasn't the ghost horses or the severed heads. It was the silence. The feeling that for 40 minutes, he and his men didn't belong to the world of the living anymore. So, next time you're driving late at night and your car starts to struggle for no reason and the radio turns to static, don't get out of the car. Don't go looking for help in the fog. Just lock your doors, close your eyes, and pray that they're just passing through. Thank you for wandering into the shadow realm with me tonight. If you want to hear more about the dark secrets hidden in China's history, make sure to subscribe to the Crimson-Eyed Panda. Just 43 days after the devastating Tangshan Earthquake, Mao Zedong, who had ruled China for 28 years, met his own end. There's a notion out there that the at least 300,000 victims who perished in that quake were like Emperor Qin Shi Huang's terracotta army, essentially sacrificed ahead of time to accompany this leader in the afterlife. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay in the light. Good night.